Et tu, Brutus, you too, Brutus. Picture the scene, okay? It's March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, the absolute most famous man alive, a guy who's literally conquered millions and marched his own troops right into his own capital, walks into a Senate meeting, and he's surrounded by guys he pardoned, guys he promoted, guys he genuinely loved like sons. And then the knives come out. It's just a moment of betrayal so incredibly profound, so cinematic, that we're still talking about it thousands of years later. But how exactly did Julius Caesar end up bleeding out on the Senate floor? And more importantly, what rose from his ashes? Well, to figure that out, we gotta go back. So let's jump right into this explainer. We're tracing the entire epic arc of the Roman Empire today. We're talking well over 1,000 years of history. How does a tiny, modest collection of riverside villages turn into an unstoppable military juggernaut that literally conquered the known world, only to suffer one of the most spectacular and honestly totally misunderstood collapses in human history? I mean, think about building something so massively powerful that 2,000 years later, its laws still govern us. Its language lives right inside ours. Its political systems literally shaped the country you're sitting in right now. Rome isn't just dry ancient history, it's basically the operating system that our modern world's still running on.
All right, part one, myth, kingdom, and republic. Every great civilization loves a really dramatic origin story. For Rome, the myth is straight out of a movie. Twin brothers Romulus and Remus, supposedly the illegitimate sons of Mars, the god of war, right? They're abandoned in a forest, nursed by a wolf. It's wild. They grow up, they found a city, but, well, brothers don't usually share power all that easily. Romulus kills Remus, names the whole city after himself, and boom, population one guy with a ton of ambition and absolutely zero guilt. But okay, while the wolf twin story is great, the actual historical evolution is a bit more grounded. Around 625 BC, it basically starts as this modest little trading post on the Tiber River. Local villages just banding together for protection. Early Rome was actually a kingdom. It was ruled by a succession of 7 kings, and these were chosen by a senate, not by a royal bloodline. But the 7th king, Tarquin the Proud, complete tyrant. When his son assaulted a noblewoman named Lucretia, the news just tore through the city like wildfire. So in 509 BC, the nobility and the common people rose up together, dragged Tarquin out, and ended the Roman monarchy for good.
And from the ashes of that rebellion, Rome invented something entirely new, the Republic, or in Latin, the res publica, literally the public thing. The very word you probably used to describe your own government comes straight from this exact moment. It was a direct, visceral reaction against tyranny. They were done with kings. So instead, they set up a system with 2 elected leaders, called consuls, and a senate divided between the ultra-wealthy patricians and the working-class plebeians. It was brilliantly designed to balance power. Except, in practice, the wealthy guys almost always won. And that created the simmering, intense class tension that would eventually tear the whole shebang apart. But before it imploded, man, the Republic went on an absolute tear of expansion.
As Rome pushed outward, they ran headfirst into Carthage. Carthage was this massive powerhouse completely controlling the Western Mediterranean. Rome wanted it, and they were perfectly willing to fight for over 120 years to get it. These were the brutal Punic Wars. Now, the Second Punic War is the one that gave us Hannibal, a Carthaginian general so terrifyingly brilliant that Roman parents literally used his name as a boogeyman to scare their kids into behaving. But by 146 BC, Rome had had enough. They didn't just defeat Carthage, they completely erased it from the map. Roman soldiers looted the city, burned it to ash, killed something like 200,000 people, and sold the 500 or so survivors into slavery. Total annihilation. With Carthage gone, the Mediterranean essentially became a Roman lake.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Republic collapses.
So here's the ultimate tragic irony of the Roman Republic. Its massive, unrelenting success, that is exactly what caused its downfall. See, the Republic was designed to run a city-state. It was absolutely not built to govern an intercontinental empire. So, unthinkable wealth floods into the pockets of the elite, inequality goes through the roof, and the armies, which used to be made up of just regular citizen farmers fighting for their home, suddenly morph into professional soldiers. And their loyalty wasn't to Rome anymore, it was to the insanely rich generals writing their paychecks. Just look at that number. 3 million. That's the estimated number of Gauls that one of those generals, Julius Caesar, fought during a brutal 6-year campaign in what's now France and Belgium. At the Siege of Alesia, Caesar literally starved out his enemies, captured Gaul, and brought just a mind-boggling amount of loot back to his men.
When he marched home, he was the most famous, wealthiest, and most powerful man breathing. Naturally, that terrified the Senate. They ordered him to disband his loyal army and come home as a private citizen. Yeah, right.
Instead, Caesar took his army and marched straight at his own city. He crossed the Rubicon River, an act of absolute, unforgivable treason, and kicked off a massive civil war. He won, obviously, and declared himself dictator for life. Which brings us right back to those 23 stab wounds. The conspirators, these guys who genuinely claimed they were acting out of pure patriotism to kill a tyrant, honestly believed that assassinating Caesar would just magically reset the Republic, like a computer. But instead, the Roman people were furious. The assassination didn't save the Republic at all. It was the final nail in the coffin, plunging Rome right back into years of relentless, bloody civil war.
Section 3. Augustus and the Golden Age.
So stepping out of the blood and ashes of all that chaos was a young guy literally nobody saw coming. Octavian. He was Caesar's great-nephew and posthumously adopted son. He forms a triumvirate, brutally crushes the assassins, and then, because this is Roman politics, turns on his own ally Mark Antony and Antony's famous partner Cleopatra. By 31 BC, after the Battle of Actium, Octavian was the last man standing. The Republic was completely dead. The empire was about to be born. But here's the multi-million-dollar question. How did Octavian, who soon gets the shiny new title of Augustus, manage to rule as an emperor without getting stabbed 23 times like his dad? Well, Caesar's fatal mistake was acting like a king. Augustus's sheer, unparalleled genius was building a total autocracy, but hiding it behind a carefully constructed, very convincing Republican facade. Outwardly, the illusion of the Republic was perfect. The Senate still met, consuls were still elected, business as usual. But the reality? Augustus just called himself princeps, meaning first citizen. Super humble, right? But he quietly held absolute military and provincial command. It was just a masterpiece of political theater.
He pulled this off through a brilliantly calculated consolidation of power. In what's called the First Settlement of 27 BCE, Augustus literally stood up in front of the Senate and dramatically renounced all his emergency powers. Like, I'm done, guys. And the Senate, absolutely terrified of plunging back into civil war, essentially begged him to keep a 10-year command over the armies. Classic reverse psychology. Then in 23 BCE, the Second Settlement, he resigns the consulship so he doesn't look like a monarch, but in exchange, the Senate hands him the power to basically veto anything and oversee every province. Amazing trade. And perhaps his smartest move of all, his fiscal reforms in 6 CE. He created a state military treasury. By making sure the state paid the soldiers' pensions, he completely severed that dangerous link where troops were only loyal to their specific generals. Piece by piece, he meticulously dismantled the very engines of civil war.
And this incredible political architecture kicked off the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. For roughly 200 years, the interior of the Roman world was largely totally free from large-scale conflict. Now, don't get me wrong, this didn't mean they weren't out conquering people on the borders. They absolutely 100% were. But internally, trade flourished. Infrastructure boomed. The economy was rock solid. Of course, the whole system relied super heavily on the emperor actually being competent. When you had good emperors, guys like Trajan, Hadrian, or Marcus Aurelius, the empire thrived. But the system also left the door wide open for erratic, catastrophic rulers. Think Caligula with his sadistic paranoia, or Nero, who literally bankrupted the treasury and, as the story goes, fiddled while Rome burned to the ground.
Moving into Section 4, Crisis of the 3rd Century.
Now, despite the chaos of those few bad apples, the system Augustus built was remarkably resilient. Until it wasn't. Things broke down incredibly fast. After the troops assassinated Emperor Severus Alexander, the whole Roman Empire entered this terrifying 50-year death spiral where it very nearly ceased to exist altogether. In 235 AD, the troops murdered their own emperor, and suddenly the military collectively realized something dangerous. They held all the cards. Literally any general with a big enough army could just declare himself emperor, march on Rome, fight a messy civil war, and then usually get assassinated by those exact same troops the second the money ran out. Historians call them the barracks emperors. They were tough guys from the provinces, elevated by the sword, dying by the sword. And just to make things worse, right smack in the middle of this political meat grinder, the plague of Cyprian sweeps through. It absolutely ravages the population, totally decimating the workforce and the army. Just a complete nightmare.
He created this terrible, unstoppable feedback loop. To fight these endless back-to-back civil wars, these would-be emperors needed massive armies. To pay those massive armies, they desperately started minting more and more coins, but they were putting less and less actual precious metal into them. That debasement caused wild hyperinflation. Trade networks completely broke down. Economic productivity just tanked. And because actual Roman citizens were dying by the thousands in civil wars and plagues, the state increasingly had to rely on hiring outside barbarian mercenaries, known as foederati, to fight their battles for them. The very engine of the Roman state was just tearing itself apart from the inside out.
And that brings us to Section 5, the fall of Rome.
So eventually, Emperor Diocletian actually manages to stabilize things a bit in 284 AD. He completely restructures the government and permanently changes how Rome is ruled. But honestly, the cracks in the foundation were just way too deep. The empire eventually splits permanently. You get a western half ruled from Rome and an eastern half ruled from Constantinople. And that brings us to the final, famous chapter, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Now, if you crack open a traditional history textbook, it's going to point you to this exact date, September 4, 476 AD. A Germanic mercenary commander named Odoacer just waltzes into the palace, deposes a 16-year-old figurehead emperor named Romulus Augustus, packs up the imperial crown jewels, and literally mails them to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, basically saying, "I'm king of Italy now." It sounds like this cataclysmic world-ending event, right? But here's the crazy part. Almost no Romans living at the time actually wrote about it as being a big deal. Why? Because the Western Empire had already lost any real, actual control decades earlier.
There's just a really stark difference between the myth we all learn in school and what actually went down. The myth is that Rome was suddenly, violently overrun by screaming hordes of barbarian invaders, sweeping in and burning everything to the ground. But the reality is way more complex. It was a gradual, slow-motion fragmentation. These Germanic peoples like the Goths and the Franks, they weren't just random outsiders. Many of them had lived inside Roman borders for generations. They served in the Roman army, as those foederati mercenaries we just talked about. They adopted Roman institutions. So as the central authority in Rome slowly went broke and lost its grip, these local military commanders just casually stepped in and took over the day-to-day administration. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic murder of an empire. It was a slow, quiet dissolution.
Ironically enough, the event that truly, utterly devastated Italy wasn't that fall in 476 AD at all. It was actually the attempt to reverse it. In the 6th century, the Eastern Roman Emperor, Justinian, decides he's going to take the West back. He sends his most brilliant general, Belisarius, who actually manages to capture Rome and Ravenna. But this sparks the absolutely brutal Gothic War. The city of Rome literally changes hands 5 times in just 16 years. The ancient aqueducts get destroyed, farms are burned to the ground, the population is systematically starved. By the time the Eastern Empire technically won this war, Italy was completely depopulated and financially ruined. The grand attempt to save Rome is what actually left it in ashes.
Finally, Section 6, the enduring Roman legacy.
Yet even though the actual political entity of the Western Roman Empire physically collapsed, its spirit absolutely refused to die. The Eastern Empire, the Byzantines, they'd carry on for nearly another 1,000 years. But even in the West, Rome achieved a cultural victory so complete, so absolute, that it literally defines the world we live in right now. Just look at the ghost of Rome that still haunts our everyday lives. When the founders of modern democracies sat down to build their governments, they reached directly back in time to the Roman res publica, complete with senates and veto powers. Roman engineering? Their incredible networks of impossibly straight roads and revolutionary concrete literally laid the physical pathways of modern Europe. Our modern legal systems are fundamentally, structurally, built on the foundation of Roman civil law. And hey, if you speak French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, or even English, your tongue is wrapping itself around the roots of the Latin language every single day.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of profound question to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. If the very laws we obey, the languages we speak, and the governments we live under are all fundamentally built on Roman foundations, did the Roman Empire ever truly fall? Or did it just evolve, embedding itself so deeply into human history that we just stopped noticing it was there? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really encourage you to look a little closer at the world around you today. You might just find Rome hiding in plain sight.